What was the intelligence picture like in the lead up to the Battle of Long Tan? We discuss the in-picture and more with Lieutenant Colonel Harry Smith.
This is the Principles of War podcast, professional military education for junior officers and senior NCOs.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back. This is episode 55 of the Principles of War podcast. This episode is the lead up to the Battle of Long Tan with Lieutenant Colonel Harry Smith, who was the OC of Delta Company 6RAR. This episode follows on from our previous interview episode with Harry Smith. The last episode proved incredibly popular. In fact, it's had the most first-day downloads of any of our previous podcasts. So have a listen to that one. More importantly, if you're interested in more of the story about Harry Smith and the way that his career progressed and the way that he trained the company, you can always read his book. So The Battle of Long Tan, The Company Commander's Story. I'll put a link for it into the show notes. It's a great book full of lots of extra detail and really does help sort of give you an idea of just who Harry Smith is and his philosophy around training the company. We'll now pick up where we left last week's episode, and this has got Harry talking about his young lieutenants. So they would have marched in sort of end of 1965 or early 1966, along with the National Servicemen privates that you got. Is that about right?
The two National Service officers, Gordon Sharp and Dave Sadden, they went to Skyville, then came to 6th Battalion, and they arrived a little time after the majority of the National Service recruits that we got, and they were made platoon commanders. But we worked very hard from January 66 until we went to Vietnam in June 66. We didn't do anything else except go on exercises up and down the east coast of Australia and climb mountains and get ourselves working as a company as best we could, which we did. And then we were pretty well trained in all aspects of weapons and discipline, marching, and the platoon commanders, of course, had to train their soldiers. The section commanders had to be trained, and of course there was platoon sergeants. I had a very good number of regular Army CSM, Jack Kirby, sergeants such as Bob Buick, and corporals, and one comes to mind who unfortunately passed on with cancer after we came home, Billy Moore. They trained the soldiers very well, and I was very happy with them.
So in January, what was the strategic picture looking like? Like, were you beginning to ramp up in preparation for Vietnam?
Yeah, well, it was all kept hush secret. You know, we weren't told that we were going to Vietnam. We were simply training as an all-infantry battalion, but the CO whispered in my ear that he thought that we would go to Vietnam in June, I think it was. So there was a bit more emphasis on training, and we knew that we were probably going to get involved in combat inside 6 months, and that sort of gave us the impetus to keep at it.
Now, your preparation for Delta was... How did it differ from the other companies?
Oh, look, we had independent companies, basically, in those days. Each company commander trained his company the way he wanted. The commanding officer didn't appear to interfere as long as we came up with the goods. But I believed in physical fitness, and we used to... in Ogre days, run around uphill, down dale, around an Ogre every morning, 5 to 8 kilometres. And I didn't believe in aerobics, but certainly running used to, with boots, used to get everybody on top. And those that didn't pass, I moved on. And when I went to Vietnam, I felt that I had a company of very fit, very well-trained soldiers.
Do you feel that there was much of a difference in the fitness and training levels between Delta and the other companies?
I can't really say. I think some of the other companies used to laugh as we, ran around the hills up and down around Enoggera, and they didn't. And I don't really know what went on in the companies because each company was basically independent.
Okay, but there was a difference between the companies, though.
Well, there appeared to be, yes.
Yeah.
So Delta Company, if we were on exercises, for example, and there was a patrol to cover 20 kilometres and another one to cover 40 kilometres, the commanding officer always go to the 40-kilometre one to Delta Company.
So you didn't have long, really, to build the company, build esprit de corps. What was your relationship like with your lieutenants?
I guess in those days I regarded my lieutenants as officers with a bunch of soldiers, 33 or 34 in their platoons, and I held them to task. I didn't get involved in personal relationships with my officers in terms of, drinking with them and so forth. I kept pretty much to myself. I laid down the law as to what we would do and made sure they did what I wanted them to do, and we got on pretty well.
How about the CO? How did you... So the CO would have come in... He would have been standing up 6 RAR as well, wouldn't he? So how did you get on with the CO?
Well, it's in my book. Of course, I didn't get on very well with Colonel Townsend. The day I marched into 6th Battalion, I came up from Melbourne and I was still wearing my green beret, and I marched into his office and saluted and said, "Good morning, sir. I'm here to join the battalion." And he just looked at me and he said, "Smith, go to the Q store, get rid of that stupid bloody green beret and get a peak cap, and then come back and I'll talk to you." So that was my introduction to the CO.
Right.
And I wasn't impressed. Of course, in those days, green berets, red berets were regarded as something different by infantry people, whereas these days, the majority of the army wear berets.
So given that two of your lieutenants were very junior, it was their first posting, how did your senior NCO, they would have all been regular army, wouldn't they?
Yes, they were.
Did you have much of a relationship with them?
Oh, look, from memory, I dealt with the platoon commanders. I didn't have the need to talk that much to the platoon sergeants or section commanders. I let the platoon commanders do that. That was their job.
Yeah. How about your CSM?
Jack Kirby.
Yeah.
Yes, a wonderful man, Jack Kirby. Sadly, he was killed by New Zealand artillery fire in 1967, an artillery mission that was fired offline and landed on the company headquarters area. I happened to be away from the company. I survived, but I think that day, apart from Jack Kirby and a couple of others, and we had the anti-tank platoon with us at that stage as a 4th platoon. Well, I rotated it with other platoons, but I think we lost 3 anti-tank platoon, but that was a disaster. And Jack Kirby was, during the Battle of Longtan, Jack Kirby disregarded his own safety. He went around distributing ammunition, talking to soldiers, giving them encouragement. And I recommended Jack for a Victoria Cross, which was not permitted. It was the CO said, "I'll only sign a DCM, Distinguished Conduct Medal," which second to Victoria Cross, but still not a cross. And one of my problems is trying to understand why no Victoria Cross was awarded to anybody in any of the 16 battalions that fought in Vietnam. There were 4 awarded to the training team, but none to battalions, and I don't understand that.
It seems like a really glaring discrepancy, doesn't it? I didn't realise that the difference was so stark until I'd read your book, where you sort of go through who was awarded what, and it's quite a difference, isn't it?
Oh, yeah. I mean, if Long Tan had been fought in Afghanistan, I'm sure my company would have finished up with 4 or 5 or 6 Victoria Crosses. But in Vietnam, there was a problem, and I don't know what the problem was. I've never been able to understand what the problem was. It had something to do with senior officers. The awards that I recommended after the Battle of Long Tan, I remember the commanding officer rang me at midnight, the night we got back into base. I think it was a couple of days after the battle, and the phone in the tent went, and the commanding officer, Colonel Townsend, said, I want your recommendations for gallantry awards in my office by noon tomorrow. Yes, sir. Yeah. I called a meeting with my platoon commanders the next morning at 7 o'clock and said, let me have your citations for those you recommend for awards, but I said, be mindful that the scale of awards is only one medal per 250 men per 6 months, and the MID, which is not a medal, simply a clasp on the service ribbon, is 1 per 150 per 6 months. So I said, the battalion's only going to get around about 8 medals and 10 MIDs for a year, so I'm not quite sure what's going to go on. But unbeknownst to me, in August 1966, the task force commander had allocated each unit of the task force its appropriate ration of medals, so that every battalion got the same number, and I believe the units down at Vung Tau, ALSG, were the same. Not that they were gallantry awards at Vung Tau, but they got X number of medals based on their strength, and one would have thought that the gallantry medals would have been reserved for those that fought in action, not, went around the restaurants at Vung Tau. But I'm not denying that a lot of people had meritorious service noteworthy that deserved an award of some kind. But I couldn't ever understand why the awards were reduced. I gave my CO something like 18 or 20 recommendations for awards for the Battle of Long Tan, and I think out of it we got 4 medals and 4 MIDs, and annoyed me that happened, and yet the task force commanders were getting distinguished service orders and never saw a shot fired. And in my own case, I was recommended for a military cross, which is normally an award for a lieutenant platoon commander. That was upgraded to a distinguished service order by Army Head or Australian Force Vietnam, and then it came back down the line, and I was downgraded again to MC, and the VSO went to the Brigadier. What annoys me, and it's in writing, and I've copied it into my book, is the citation. It's for his personal direction of the Battle of Long Tan. The Brigadier was 5 miles away.
Yes.
Those sorts of things were very upsetting and annoying, and it detracted from the soldiers who should have got awards.
Absolutely. And there's still work to this day to try and redress some of those imbalances, isn't there?
Yes, well, I did. I couldn't do anything for 30 years because there was a 30-year secrecy period. And it was only in 1996 that I was able to get all the citations that eventually were approved. But there was no guarantee that the citation that I put in was the citation that was approved. And it was only in 1996 that I was able to get into the National Archives and the files and War Memorial, get the forms that were put up for, that were approved, and those that weren't approved. And I set about doing something about it, and it took me, well, another 20 years and a number of reviews before I finally achieved the awards under a new system, 1981 system, for those that I'd recommended in 1966.
And it's interesting because it wasn't just the Australian awards that had issues as well. The South Vietnamese government wanted to issue some medals after the battle as well, didn't they?
Yes, they did. The South Vietnamese government wanted to give us first of all, the American Army, the American government awarded us the United States Presidential Unit Citation, commonly called the Blue Swimming Pool, which is the highest American unit award available. And that went to my company and only my company. And the South Vietnamese gave us the unit citation for gallantry. There was a lot of nonsense about accepting the Vietnamese awards, including some personal medals, because they supposedly had to be approved by Her Majesty the Queen. And they hadn't been approved, so we didn't get them. And it took me a long time to get around that, and I finally got the approval for the awards. But it was another 20 years before that happened. Our medals and award system in Vietnam in those days, a ration on gallantry, absolutely nonsense. Very interesting that in Afghanistan, the new system of Australian award, there was no ration on gallantry awards. If you wanted 20 gallantry awards for a battle, you could, within reason, you could get them, shall we say. But not in Vietnam. It was a British system of 1 per 250 per 6 months. Stupid system.
It doesn't seem rational at all, does it?
No.
So, when did you find out that you would be going to Vietnam?
Definitely in, I think it was at the end of January 1966, we were told that we would be going to Vietnam. I think it was in June, late June. Then we set about lots more training, exercises, Shoalwater Bay, Mount Spec, back of Townsville, and various other places, Penangra, to get everybody trained up to the highest standard we could get them before we went.
And when did you actually ship out then?
I can't put a date to it right now. My old 87-year-old brain doesn't remember all the dates, but we actually were, I think, shipped out in end of June or early July.
So not too long before the battle?
The aim of the game, we were flown over to Saigon, and then we were flown down to Vung Tau in Chinook, and we were to have something like 2 to 3 weeks on the beach at Vung Tau to acclimatise to the climate itself, and also undertake training in that sort of environment. We had only been there a week, and we were moved up to Nui Dat because the intelligence situation was that the North Vietnamese army were going to attack Nui Dat base, and there was only 5 battalion in the base, so 6 battalion was ordered up to Nui Dat 1 or 2 weeks ahead of schedule.
That's interesting. Do you know what the INT picture was like? What was driving that information that the base was under threat?
Oh, I don't know who or what was involved, but we had one officer, Australian officer, member of the Army training team, who was with Republic of Viet Forces. I think it was 10 Division headquarters based at Baria, which wasn't far from Nui Dat. Mike Wells used to pass on information that was collected by the Arvin Division from all over the province, and that would come to him, and he used to go to the task force and pass information on to the task force. I guess there are many other sources of intelligence were available, and information would come into the task force, but we understood that there was a North Vietnamese, mainly North Vietnamese regiment in the province, and a second North Vietnamese regiment was in the northern part of the province. So that there were two regiments. And at that stage of the game, the task force at Mary That only had 1 battalion, 5 battalion, until 6 battalion arrived. But, you know, we didn't know what was going on or where the enemy was going to do. And it wasn't until they mortared the Mary That base on the 17th of morning of the 17th of August that, you know, the first time anything serious was going to happen. And the Bravo company was sent out at dawn to try and find out what the enemy had done in terms of firing positions, and they actually found mortar base plate positions and rocket launcher positions. But they went out without any bedding or rations, and we were sent out as a company to replace them, which we did the following day. And I remember walking around with Noel Ford, who was the company commander of Bravo Company, and Noel sadly disappeared from Bondi Beach. He came back to go to Staff College in December '66, and apparently when he was going back to his next posting, he went for a swim at Bondi Beach and never returned to his car, and that was the end of Noel, unfortunately. But he was the company commander of Bravo Company, and his company found mortar base plate positions and various things. I didn't have the equipment and rations to stay out, so my company was told to go out, and we went out, and we got there at about 1 o'clock on the afternoon of the 18th, and I was briefed by Noel, and we went briefly into the rubber plantation, and he showed me various tracks and bloodstains, and explained to me that he'd been almost right through the rubber plantation that morning and found nothing. I didn't have any idea that there was going to be a problem. Bravo Company left and went home to, well, actually he sent 2 platoons of his company back to Nui Dat at dawn to go on leave to Vung Tau, and the other platoon left with the company headquarters around about lunchtime after we arrived. And then we looked at what we would have to do, and, you know, I had the option of going north, south, east, east or not west, but south, north, or to the east. And I knew that Alpha Company is up to the north, and I chose to go east, and that's where I thought the enemy would have gone after they fired the mortars and rocket launchers at the base. And nobody told me that there was a regiment in the jungle to the east of Long Tan, and that's where the intelligence situation really fell down, because years later I found that the task force commander had been told that the intelligence from available sources showed that there was an enemy regiment had moved from their home base, the Miri Mato Mountains, a town called Swan Rock, into the back of the Long Tan rubber plantation, and was hiding in the jungle for at least 24 hours before we left base. And the brigadier's comment was, when he was told that the enemy commander had a radio intercept from the area behind Long Tan, he said it was probably just the commander doing the reconnaissance. Well, the reconnaissance for what?
This is probably a good place to take a break in the interview, so we'll return next week with the continuation on the story of the Battle of Long Tan from the perspective of Harry Smith, the OC of Delta Company during the Battle of Long Tan. If you've enjoyed this episode, then please leave a review in iTunes, or if you see us pop up on Facebook or on Twitter, give us a like, a share, or more importantly, share it with those that you're serving with. The more PME that we do, the better it is for everyone.
The Principles of War podcast is brought to you by James Ealing. The show notes for the Principles of War podcast are available at www.theprinciplesofwar.com for maps, photos and other information that didn't make it into the podcast. Follow us on Facebook or tweet us at Surprise Podcast. If you've enjoyed this podcast, please leave a review on iTunes and tag a mate in on one of our episodes. All opinions expressed by individuals are those of those individuals and not of any organisation.